I knew the moment my daughter stopped seeing me as her mother and started seeing me as an obstacle. It didn't happen during the years I packed her lunches, or the midnight drives to urgent care, or the afternoons I sat through recitals in folding chairs that pinched the backs of my thighs. It happened in my kitchen, under the brittle light of the ceiling fixture I've been meaning to replace, when she clicked across the tile in heels that sounded like a judge's gavel and said, almost breezily, "We're going to need you to sign a quitclaim deed." She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked at her phone, at a screen that threw blue light across her cheekbones, and then at the window over the sink where the lemon tree brushed the glass, as if the lemons might nod their agreement. "It's just paperwork," she added, and that's when my hands went cold around the neck of the kettle. The house is not grand, but it is stubborn. It sits on its little plot the way an old dog lies on a rug, faithful, unmovable, smelling faintly of dust and sunshine. My late husband and I painted these baseboards the week after we moved in, him teasing me for taping the edges with the fervor of a crime scene tech while he slapped on paint like a man half drunk on optimism. We stapled the underlay in the living room together, arguing about whether the couch should face the TV or the picture window. And we hung the checkered curtains in the kitchen with a level because there are small dignities you can control in a life that refuses you the larger ones. He died here, not in the dramatic way people imagine, with last words in hands held and a violin rising in the background, but in the ordinary way, one breath that didn't come after the last one that did. I learned then that houses keep secrets like that. Grief moves into the air vents and only leaves when you open all the windows, even in winter. After the funeral, after the casseroles, after the days when people remembered to call and then the days when they didn't, I made a promise to the house. I told it I would keep it whole, that its walls would not be carved up by strangers or listed on websites, that I would live in it the way one lives in a body, carefully, with gratitude, aware that it is finite and precious. I did not know, then, that the most determined stranger would have my daughter's eyes. She, Lauren, wore a camel coat that looked too expensive to be practical and had her hair scraped back in a way that announced both competence and disdain. "It's just cleaner if the deed is in our name," she said, meaning hers and Evan's, the man who, months ago at dinner, had explained adjustable-rate mortgages to me as if he were teaching a Labrador to use a calculator. "Lenders like it. We'll refinance later. You won't even notice the change." She touched the ceramic hen cookie jar as if it were a patient she was about to sedate. "And we're not kicking you out," she went on, a laugh escaping her that didn't reach her eyes. "We just set you up with a separate entrance. More privacy. Like a garden suite." I could hear the word that didn't make it out of her mouth, Granny. Out of the corner of my vision, the refrigerator was a collage of a life, magnets from county fairs, a curling recipe for peach cobbler in my mother's handwriting, a magnetized notepad where I'd written trash bags, dish soap, sympathy. My hand shook and the kettle, half full, set itself back on the cold burner with a too loud clank. "It's my house," I said, and the words sounded childish and small, like something you'd hear on a playground when one kid snatches a toy from another. "We know," she replied, patient, reasonable, awful. "But this way is safer for everyone." Safety is the word people use when they are about to take something from you. I learned that after my husband died and the bank called to verify a charge on the card I didn't recognize. I learned it again when the hospital billing office used it to justify a number that could have bought a used car. And I learned it most clearly the year Lauren called from college 3 states away and said, voice tiny and valiant, that her financial aid had been delayed and her rent was due. I sold a sapphire brooch then, the one my husband gave me for our 30th, the one that made my throat warm and my mind go quiet whenever I opened the velvet box. I sold it to a man who smelled like cologne and winter air and told me he could give me more if I had the paperwork, as if love required documentation. I wired the rent that afternoon and told her it was nothing, truly, and then sat on the edge of the bed with my empty hands. Years later, when she moved into her first apartment with Evan, the apartment that had black metal railings and too few outlets, she called again, this time about a credit card balance that wouldn't stop startling her. "I don't know how it got this high," she said, a phrase that has a way of throwing blame at the nearest person willing to catch it. "I paid it off." I didn't tell her. I told myself it would teach her to breathe without the tightness in her chest that debt brings. I did not ask for gratitude because that felt like charging interest on love. Now, in my kitchen, she offered me safety once more. "Sign this, it keeps everything neat." The papers she slid toward me were in a tidy manila envelope with tabs. Evan had labeled them in blocky Sharpie. There was a line for my signature and a witness and a notary and nowhere I could see for the years that had made this house more than lumber and drywall. "No," I said. It took me too long to say it. The O of the word stretched like gum and snapped back on my tongue. Her mouth flattened, then rearranged itself to kind. "Lauren can be kind the way actors can cry on cue." "Mom," she said, "we're trying to help. You worry about everything. Property taxes go up. Maintenance. Roofs. What if you fall?" A parade of catastrophes, leaks, cracks, break-ins, the universe's favorite arguments. She gestured toward the door, toward the small step I sometimes take slower on the damp mornings. "We'd handle it. You'd be free." It is a particular cruelty to call a cage freedom because it is tidy. I imagined the house with a second door cut into the wall and a lock on my side whose key I would never quite find. I imagined Evan explaining to his friends that it was only logical to consolidate assets. I imagined Lauren's relief, bright and childlike, at the hurry of paperwork completed. I imagined myself a guest in the one place where my grief had learned the shape of the rooms. "I'm not signing," I said. The phone on the counter buzzed angrily. She glanced, her thumb moved, some new urgency assembled itself where a daughter's face should be. "Fine," she said, the word a blade dulled by civility. "But we can't wait forever." She picked up the envelope, slid the papers back in with a practiced flick that told me this scene had been rehearsed somewhere I wasn't invited, and then she was at the door, and then the door was closing, and then the house exhaled the way a house does when it's holding in its walls a conversation that did not end properly. After she left, the afternoon sat on the table with me like a heavy, disapproving aunt. I made tea and did not drink it. I washed a dish that was already clean. I walked the perimeter of the rooms, laying my hand on the paint as if the walls might offer a pulse. In the bedroom I opened the drawer where the velvet box used to live and found only the indentation the box had left behind, which felt like a metaphor so on the nose I almost laughed. I took out a folder instead, the emergency one with birth certificates, my passport, the will I had updated after my husband died. I had set up a trust then, a simple one, a thing my lawyer had told me would make paperwork easier later. He'd used words like revocable and successor trustee, and I had nodded, thinking only that it sounded like building a bridge across a river you hoped would never flood. I hadn't looked at those pages in years. They smelled faintly of toner and time. Under them was a note in my own hand: "If something happens, call Maria." Maria is my neighbor, 2 houses down, a retired nurse who waters her zinnias like she's blessing them. She brings me soup when the weather remembers it can hurt. She has never asked me for money or advice about refinancing. I put the folder back and went to the mailbox because sometimes the most ordinary motions can stand in for courage. The mailbox held what mailboxes hold, coupons one could live an entire life without redeeming, a glossy catalog where everyone looked thin and able to sit cross-legged on white sofas without worrying about their knees, a bill, another bill, and a stiff envelope that made my stomach tilt when I turned it over and saw the words certified mail next to my name. I signed for it with a pen that refused to behave and carried it inside like a warning. The envelope resisted at first and then yielded with a sound like a seam coming undone. Inside, a form printed in the bureaucratic font that manages to be both bored and threatening. Change an ownership statement, it announced in a tone that suggested this had already been done and I was late to the party. My eyes searched for the mistake and then found it, and my knees softened into the chair before I told them to. There was my name, yes, and there was my address, and there was my signature at the bottom, a signature I did not remember making, the looping L and the careful, fussy M of my last name, executed just wrong enough that my bones knew what my eyes argued with. Someone had practiced me. Someone had put my hand on a page without my body attached. Next to it the date, last Tuesday, the same Tuesday I'd spent cleaning the bottom shelf of the pantry and calling the pharmacy about a refill and watching a show where strangers renounce clutter as if it were a sin. The form mentioned penalties for failing to report changes within 90 days and used the phrase subject to reassessment as if that were a small thing, as if being reassessed were not the condition I had been living in since my husband's final breath. I held the paper up to the window and watched the lemon tree shadow itself across the words and thought, with a clarity that startled me clean, if they were willing to sign my name, what else were they willing to take? I did not sleep that night. The house itself seemed restless, the pipes ticking in the walls like a nervous heart, the refrigerator humming and cutting off at odd intervals. I kept replaying the signature in my mind, my own name, but wrong, slanted like a stranger had leaned on it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lauren at the kitchen table, pen in hand, eyes bright with the same determination she had as a little girl when she insisted on cutting her own bangs with craft scissors. Only now, that determination had been sharpened into something dangerous. At 3 a.m, I rose and made tea I didn't drink, sitting at the table with the certified letters spread in front of me as if staring could reverse ink. When dawn crept in through the curtains, I called the county recorder's office. My voice shook as I spelled my name. A clerk with a voice too young for the weight it carried confirmed what I already feared. A transfer had been initiated. "It's already in process," she said, the way one might say the tide is already coming in. I asked about contesting it, about fraud, about undoing what had been done without me. She gave me another number, a form number, a case number, a maze of numbers that felt designed to tangle me until I surrendered. When I hung up, my hands were damp. I stared at the phone and thought about calling Lauren directly, but the memory of her laugh, soft, false, dismissive, froze me. I wasn't ready for her voice. Not yet. Instead, I called Maria. She came over within 10 minutes, wearing gardening gloves and carrying a thermos of coffee as if she'd been preparing for this. I showed her the papers, my voice breaking in places I hadn't authorized. She read them silently, lips pressed thin, then looked at me with a steadiness that made my throat ache. "This is fraud," she said simply. "You need a lawyer. And fast." She poured me coffee I couldn't taste and began writing down names she trusted, people she knew from her years in the hospital, from neighbors who had fought their own quiet wars with paperwork and power. "You are not alone in this," she said firmly, as if daring the walls to contradict her. That afternoon, I met with a lawyer named Reynolds in an office that smelled faintly of dust and stale coffee. He was gray-haired, with glasses that kept sliding down his nose, but his eyes were sharp. He read the certified letter, his eyebrows twitching only slightly, and then leaned back in his chair. "You're not the first," he said. Children can be the cruelest thieves because they don't see it as theft. They see it as inevitability. He outlined the process: affidavits, court hearings, the possibility of criminal charges. Each word was a stone added to the weight already pressing on my chest. The good news, he said, adjusting his glasses again, is that forged signatures don't hold. We can fight this. But it will not be pleasant. He asked if I wanted to proceed. I thought of my husband's hands smoothing paint on these walls, of the nights I had fallen asleep to the sound of the lemon tree brushing against the window, of the promise I made to the house to keep it whole. Yes, I said. My voice was thin, but it did not waver. We fight. When I returned home, the house greeted me with silence that felt almost approving. I set the legal papers on the counter and sat in my chair by the window. Outside, the lemon tree swayed, its branches heavy with fruit. I imagined my husband's voice, low and steady, telling me I had done the right thing. For the first time in days, my chest loosened. But beneath it, like a low drumbeat, was the knowledge that Lauren would not let this go quietly. She would come back. And when she did, I would have to look into her eyes, the same eyes that once searched mine for comfort after nightmares, and tell her no again. 2 days passed before Lauren returned. I knew she would, the way you know rain is coming when the air turns heavy and the birds fall silent. I spent those 2 days in a kind of suspended rehearsal, walking the rooms, touching the walls, reminding myself what I was protecting. The lawyer had assured me the process was underway, that the forged transfer would be challenged, that the law, slow and lumbering, was still on my side. But the law is not a daughter. The law does not know how to walk into your kitchen with the smell of your own perfume on her coat because she borrowed it without asking 10 years ago and never gave it back. She arrived just after noon on Thursday, the sun slanting across the porch in a way that made her shadow stretch tall, commanding. Evan was with her. He carried a briefcase as though the performance of professionalism could disguise the fact that he was here to dismantle a life brick by brick. Lauren smiled when I opened the door, but it was the brittle smile of a hostess greeting a guest she doesn't like but cannot avoid. "Mom," she said, her voice rehearsed, soft at the edges. "We need to talk." I stepped aside because confrontation is harder with a closed door between you, and because some part of me, the foolish part that still remembers her as a girl in a pink backpack, believed she might sit down and explain herself with honesty. They took seats at the kitchen table, the same table where she once finger-painted with too much blue, where she once wrote a college essay about ambition that I proofread through tears of pride. Evan opened the briefcase with the precision of a magician revealing a trick. Papers emerged, contracts clipped together, pages thick with paragraphs written in a language that pretended to be English but was really Greek in translation. "We think you're overreacting," Lauren began, her hands folded neatly in front of her, the way she used to fold them in church when she wanted me to see she was being good. "This isn't about taking anything from you. It's about making sure everything is efficient." Evan nodded, tapping the stack of papers. "There are tax implications. Liabilities. We're protecting you." I stared at the papers, at the black ink that had nearly stolen the only thing tethering me to my past. My voice came slowly, rough with disuse. "You forged my signature." Lauren's cheeks flushed, just briefly, but Evan jumped in before the silence could bloom. "That was a misunderstanding," he said, his tone smooth as glass. "A clerical shortcut. You thought I was too old to notice," I cut him off. My voice surprised me. It had an edge I hadn't heard in years, the steel buried under decades of kindness. "You thought you could erase me from my own house." Lauren's eyes flickered, anger flashing beneath the veneer. Mom, this place is too much for you. You can't keep living here like it's 20 years ago. Things change. People change. You need to let go. Her words were knives wrapped in silk, slicing even as they pretended to comfort. I wanted to tell her about the nights I still hear her as a child, calling from her bedroom after a nightmare, how I would sit on this very floor until her breathing steadied. I wanted to ask her when exactly love expired, when it became an obstacle rather than a bond. Instead, I said, I promised your father I would keep this house. And I promised myself. The air thickened. Evan shuffled the papers, tried to slide them closer, as though proximity might seduce me. I didn't touch them. I've spoken to a lawyer, I said. Lauren's face snapped tight, her mouth a line of fury. You didn't have to do that, she hissed, and for the first time I heard the truth behind all the practiced kindness, resentment, entitlement, the rage of a child denied. We're family, she added, but the words sounded foreign, like she was testing how it felt in her mouth. Evan placed a hand on her wrist, a gesture of control disguised as comfort. Let's not escalate, he murmured, his eyes on me, assessing, calculating. I saw then what he was, not a partner, not even truly a husband to her in spirit, but a strategist who had found in my daughter a willing accomplice. Together, they weren't asking, they were taking. I stood slowly, my hands trembling only slightly. This conversation is over, I said, and pointed to the door. Lauren rose, her chair scraping against the tile, her eyes blazing. For a moment, I saw the child she once was, the stubborn tilt of her chin, the fierce refusal to accept no. But that child had been replaced by this woman, and this woman was no longer mine. You'll regret this, she said softly, almost tenderly, and then she was gone, Evan following with his briefcase snapping shut like a verdict. When the door closed, I leaned against it, my breath ragged. The house seemed to shudder, the lemon tree tapping at the window as if in warning. I thought of the papers still on the table, their edges curling slightly under the weight of their own lies. I burned them in the fireplace that night, watching the flames lick away the words, turning greed to ash. But I knew the fight wasn't over. Families don't end wars with a single battle. They drag them through birthdays, through holidays, through every silence at every dinner table. As the fire died down, I whispered into the darkness, "This house is mine." And for the first time, the silence felt like agreement. The days that followed were a strange blend of quiet and dread. On the surface, everything looked the same. The lemon tree brushed its branches against the window. The mail arrived stuffed with catalogs and bills. Maria waved from her garden. Yet beneath it all, I felt the tremor of something looming. I had been a mother long enough to know when silence was not peace but plotting. Lauren's anger had not burned out when she left my kitchen. It had banked, waiting for more oxygen. On Sunday morning, I woke to the sound of gravel crunching in the driveway. My curtains were half drawn, the light thin and gray, and I watched as Lauren's car pulled in too quickly, scattering pebbles. She didn't come alone. Evan was with her, of course, but so was a man I didn't recognize, tall, wearing a suit too dark for daylight, carrying a slim briefcase. They walked to the porch as if they owned the ground beneath their feet. My stomach knotted before I even opened the door. "Mom," Lauren said when I cracked it. Her voice was sugar-iced over something sharp. "This is Mr. Hammond. He's a financial advisor. We thought it would help to have a professional explain things clearly." She didn't wait for me to invite them in. She stepped across the threshold, bringing her perfume and her determination with her. The stranger followed, setting his briefcase on my table, and Evan shut the door behind them as if sealing me inside a cage. Mr. Hammond spread out charts and papers with the air of a magician revealing wonders. Colored graphs, lists of numbers, projections that climbed like mountains. "Your equity is tied up in the house," he explained, pointing to a line that slid upward across the page. "You could liquidate, reinvest, and secure a much more comfortable future. It's not about losing, it's about optimizing." Optimizing. As if my life were a machine that needed tuning. I sat opposite him, my hands folded tightly in my lap. "I'm not interested in optimizing," I said. "I'm interested in living here, in my home." Lauren's sigh was theatrical, her frustration barely contained. "You're being stubborn. This isn't safe. What if you fall? What if you can't keep up with the taxes? What if—" Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and for a flicker of a moment I thought I saw the girl she used to be, the one who once cried when she lost her stuffed rabbit in the yard, who clung to me as though I were the only anchor in her storm. But the flicker vanished, replaced by steel. "What if you leave us with a mess to clean up?" That was the heart of it. Not my safety, not my comfort. Their convenience. I looked at her, really looked, and I saw it all, the way Evan's hand rested possessively on her shoulder, the way she leaned toward him as if drawing strength, the way her eyes avoided mine when the truth pressed too close. This wasn't about me. It was about control, about assets, about the empire they wanted to build on the bones of my sacrifices. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said evenly. "The forged documents have been challenged. You may want to prepare yourselves for what comes next." Mr. Hammond's polite smile faltered, but Evan leaned forward, his eyes cold. "You don't want this to get ugly," he said. "Court cases are expensive. They drag on. They drain everyone. They drain the guilty most of all," I replied. My voice was steady now, stronger than I felt. "And I have nothing to be guilty for." The silence that followed was thick, humming with all the words none of us dared say. Finally, Lauren pushed back her chair. The scrape on the tile was louder than it should have been. "If this is how you want it," she said quietly, "don't expect us to come back." She gathered her papers, her anger hidden behind careful movements, and walked out. Evan followed, his briefcase snapping shut like a threat. When the door closed, I stayed at the table for a long time, staring at the papers they had left behind. Charts and numbers meant to terrify me into surrender. I fed them into the fireplace one by one, watching the colors curl into black. The house smelled faintly of smoke and resolve. That night, Maria came over with soup and bread, sitting with me in the glow of the fading fire. I told her everything, every word, every threat, every silence. She listened without interruption, her hands wrapped around her mug. When I finished, she said, "They'll try again. People like that always do. But you're stronger than they remember." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "And you're not alone." For the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. Yet even in dreams, I could feel the storm gathering, pressing at the edges of my peace, waiting for its moment to break through. At night the house is a mirror, showing me pieces of myself I'd rather not face. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of wood settling in its old bones, the occasional groan of the pipes, these sounds become a chorus reminding me of all the years I've lived here, of the life stitched into every corner. And yet, when I close my eyes, I don't see the safe familiarity of my home. I see Lauren's face, set in that mask of polite impatience, her words like cold water poured down my spine, "You'll regret this." I replay the kitchen scene over and over, like a film reel I can't turn off. Each time, I think, maybe if I had softened my tone, maybe if I had begged instead of defied, maybe if I had appealed to some hidden shard of the little girl she once was. But then I hear my husband's voice in memory, firm and steady: "Do not let them take what we built." He was never a sentimental man, but he believed in honoring effort, in protecting what was ours. The echo of him steals me, even as my chest tightens with grief. There are moments when I catch myself blaming me. Was I too indulgent when she was young? Did I give her too much, shield her too often, teach her that love came without boundaries? I remember the summer she begged for ballet lessons. We couldn't afford them then, but I picked up weekend shifts at the library, shelving books until my hands ached, just so she could have her pink slippers and stand under the hot lights on recital night. Her face had glowed with pride. That memory used to comfort me. Now it pricks like a thorn, proof that sacrifice can curdle into entitlement if it is never named, never balanced with gratitude. The loneliness has a physical weight. In the mornings, when I brew tea, I set 2 cups out by instinct. One for me, one for the ghost of my husband. Sometimes I whisper to him, words I could never bring myself to say aloud when he was here. She wants the house, I tell the empty chair. She wants everything we were. The chair never answers, but I imagine he would nod, his brow furrowing the way it always did when the world disappointed him. Walking the rooms, I touch objects as though they might tether me. The clock he fixed, its pendulum steady as breath. The sofa where Lauren once sprawled with textbooks, chewing her pen cap, frowning at equations. The photo albums lined neatly on the shelf, each one a mosaic of smiles I now question. Were they real? Or were they practice for the performance she gives me now? I remind myself of Maria's words, "You're not alone." But when the sun sinks and shadows pool in the corners, the truth presses hard: I am alone in ways that matter most. The phone stays quiet. No call from Lauren to check if I've eaten, no casual text with a photo of her dog or a funny meme. She has cut the cord already, and I feel the severing like phantom pain. The fear is not just of losing the house. It is of losing her completely. I imagine years passing where we are strangers, where she drives past this street and doesn't even glance at the windows. I imagine my death met not with mourning but with accountants tallying columns. And then I imagine her waking one day, too late, realizing what she has done, and the bitterness of that picture twists my stomach more than any threat of courts or papers. In the mirror over the mantel, I catch sight of my own reflection. The lines around my eyes are deeper now, carved not just by time but by worry. For the first time in years, I wonder if perhaps Lauren was right in one small way: I do look fragile. But fragility is not the same as weakness. Fragility means you can crack, yes, but it also means you gleam in the light if you endure. I lift my chin at my own reflection and whisper, "Not yet. You don't get to take me yet." That night, I write a letter. Not to her, not to the courts, but to myself. A declaration. I write down everything I remember: her first steps on the back porch, the way she used to press daisies between book pages, the way she once promised at 12 years old never to leave me. I write it all as proof, as testimony, as if the house itself might one day read it when I am gone. And when I finish, my hand cramped, my eyes swollen, I fold the letter and place it inside the velvet box where the sapphire brooch used to rest. Empty spaces deserve to hold something sacred, even if it is only words. As I slide the drawer shut, a strange calm settles in me. Whatever storms are coming, whatever trials and betrayals lie ahead, I know this: I am still here. And I will fight, not just for the house, but for the part of me that refuses to vanish quietly. The first whisper came from the grocery store. I was standing in the produce aisle, weighing peaches in my palm, when I felt the shift, the sidelong glance, the murmured exchange just out of earshot. Mrs. Adler from 3 streets over passed by with her cart, offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, and kept moving. I told myself it was nothing. But by the time I reached the dairy section, 2 more neighbors had done the same. Smiles, brittle as dry leaves. Eyes darting. Conversations clipped mid-sentence when I drew near. By the time I reached the register, my heart was beating too fast. It was Maria who told me the truth later that evening, sitting on my porch with her thermos of coffee. "Lauren's been talking," she said gently. "To the neighbors. To her cousins. She's telling them you're unwell." The word clanged in the air like a bell struck wrong. Unwell. It was a clever choice. Not outright accusations, just a seed of doubt planted in familiar soil. The kind of word that makes people tilt their heads with concern, lower their voices, rehearse sympathy even as they step back. "She says you're forgetful," Maria continued, her eyes full of apology for delivering the news. "That you've been leaving the stove on, that you misplace bills, that you're confused about dates." She hesitated. "She's saying you're not capable of managing things anymore." For a moment, the world tilted. The house itself seemed to flinch. I wanted to laugh, to call it absurd, but I remembered the kettle clattering against the burner when my hands shook. I remembered searching for my glasses for half an hour only to find them perched on my head. Ordinary slips, human slips, but in Lauren's retelling, they became evidence. A case against me. Within a week, the whispers grew louder. A cousin called from across the country, voice dripping with false cheer. "How are you holding up? Lauren says you've been having a hard time." The mailman lingered too long, asking if I needed help bringing packages inside. Even the pastor at church placed a too gentle hand on my shoulder, as if I might crumble under its weight. The betrayal burned hotter than any forged signature. This was theft not of property but of perception. Lauren was stealing me from myself, recasting me in a role I had not agreed to play, the fragile matriarch, too confused to know what was best for her. And the worst part, the part that made my chest ache, was how easily people believed it. At night, I began doubting myself. Was I repeating stories more often than before? Did I forget to lock the back door last Tuesday? I found myself keeping lists of everything, when I paid the bills, what I cooked for dinner, even when I watered the lemon tree. Proof for a trial that existed only in shadows. Maria tried to anchor me. She came over with her easy laugh, her steady hands, reminding me that strength does not vanish because someone questions it. But still, I felt the net tightening. Lauren wasn't just preparing for a legal battle. She was waging war in the court of reputation, and in a town like ours, that court mattered almost as much as the one with gavels and judges. The final blow came one afternoon when I answered the doorbell and found my niece, Rebecca, standing on the porch with a casserole dish and pity in her eyes. "Auntie," she said softly, "I just want you to know we'll take care of you. No matter what happens." She pressed the dish into my hands like an offering, as though I were already being lowered into the ground. I stood there, casserole cooling against my palms, as the realization sank in. Lauren was not just trying to take my house. She was taking my story, rewriting me in real time, until everyone around me would see not a woman fighting for her home but a senile relic clinging to things she didn't understand. That night, I locked every door, every window, not out of fear of strangers but out of fear of being erased. The lemon tree swayed outside, whispering against the glass, and I swore aloud to the dark, I remember. I remember everything. And I will not let her turn me into someone I am not. It started with a phone call from my sister. Her voice was brisk, efficient, stripped of warmth. "We need to talk," she said. "The family's concerned." Concerned. That word again, heavy with judgment disguised as kindness. She insisted on a gathering, just the cousins and a few of us who care about you. Against my better instincts, I agreed. Part of me wanted to believe I could still explain myself, that reason might find a foothold where love had faltered. They chose my niece Rebecca's house, a sprawling suburban place with too many windows and not enough curtains. When I arrived, casserole dishes lined the counter, as though feeding me might soften the blow of what was coming. The living room was already full, cousins, nieces, nephews, my sister with her arms folded tight across her chest. And there, perched in the center like the star of a play she had written herself, was Lauren. Evan sat beside her, his expression neutral, watchful. The conversation began with pleasantries, small talk about weather, about Rebecca's new kitchen remodel, but the undercurrent was sharp, slicing. Finally, my sister cleared her throat. "We're worried about you," she said. "Lauren tells us you've been having some difficulties." I felt every pair of eyes land on me, heavy with expectation. Lauren's gaze was steady, calm, rehearsed. She looked like a woman fulfilling a duty, not a daughter dismantling her mother. "What kind of difficulties?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Forgetfulness," my sister said. "Neglecting the house. Bills unpaid. Unsafe habits." She ticked them off like items on a grocery list. Around the room, heads nodded. Some avoided my eyes, ashamed, others stared openly, hungry for the drama. I wanted to scream. To shout that I still balanced my checkbook, that the lights were on, that the lemon tree in my yard still bore fruit because I cared for it. Instead, I drew a breath and said, "These are lies. I am not incompetent. I am not senile. I know exactly what is happening here." Lauren leaned forward then, her voice soft, almost soothing. "Mom, no one's saying you're senile. We just want what's best for you. The house is too much. The responsibility." "The house is mine," I cut in. My words rang too loudly, startling even me. "It was mine with your father, it is mine now, and I will not sign it away." The silence afterward was thick. My sister shifted in her chair, her mouth tight. Rebecca glanced at Evan, as though seeking confirmation that they were doing the right thing. Finally, Lauren spoke again, quieter but sharper. "You don't understand how dangerous this is. If you won't act in your own best interest, then we'll have to." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Around the room, I saw the shift, the family choosing sides, some leaning toward Lauren's certainty, others frowning but silent. I realized then that this was no longer just between us. She had pulled the whole family into the fight, turned my blood against me. When I left, the night air was cool against my face, but I felt fevered, trembling. Maria was waiting when I came home, having seen the gathering from her porch. I told her everything, every word, every look, and she listened with the patience of someone who has weathered storms before. "They've drawn their lines," she said finally. "But so have you. Now it's time to show them you won't be moved." I looked at my house then, its windows glowing softly in the dark, the lemon tree shifting in the breeze. And I knew, this was no longer about family reconciliation. This was war, and I was fighting not just for bricks and walls but for my right to be who I was, unbroken, unrewritten. The first notice from the court arrived folded in a manila envelope, its weight heavier than paper had any right to be. I carried it into the kitchen like it might explode. Maria sat with me while I slit it open, her steady presence the only thing keeping my hands from shaking too hard. The words were blunt: petition for conservatorship. Lauren had filed. I read it 3 times before the meaning sank in. My own daughter was asking the court to declare me incapable of managing my life. The words bled together: incompetent, diminished capacity, guardian of estate. Each sentence stripped me further, as though I were being unstitched in front of strangers. Maria put her hand over mine. "This isn't the end," she said firmly. "This is just the beginning of the fight." We called Reynolds, the lawyer, that afternoon. He met us in his office lined with dusty law books, his glasses sliding down his nose as he scanned the petition. "Classic play," he muttered. "They're laying groundwork. If she can convince the judge you're unfit, she controls everything. The house, the accounts, even decisions about your medical care." He looked up, his gaze sharp. "But you're lucid, competent, and you've got witnesses who'll testify to that. We'll fight." The weeks that followed blurred into a maze of paperwork and preparation. Reynolds gathered statements, Maria's sworn testimony, neighbors willing to vouch that I paid my bills, that I tended my garden, that I wasn't the fragile caricature Lauren was painting. Still, doubt gnawed at me. Each time I misplaced my keys, each time I forgot why I'd walked into a room, I heard Lauren's voice in my head: "See? She can't manage anymore." The first hearing was in a courtroom that smelled faintly of polish and nerves. I sat at a table beside Reynolds, my palms damp against the cool surface. Across the aisle, Lauren and Evan sat flanked by their own attorney, a polished woman in a navy suit who exuded confidence like perfume. Lauren wouldn't meet my eyes. The judge, a man with silver hair and a voice that brooked no nonsense, called the session to order. Lauren's attorney began, painting a picture of a frail woman overwhelmed by responsibility, a danger to herself if left unattended. She spoke of bills unpaid, appliances left running, confusion about dates. Each claim stabbed at me, twisted into truth by omission. Then Reynolds rose. He presented Maria's testimony, photographs of my meticulously kept checkbook, utility records with every bill paid on time. He spoke of my clarity, my independence. "This is not a case of incapacity," he said firmly. "This is a case of a daughter seeking control." When the judge asked if I wished to speak, I rose on trembling legs. The room spun briefly, but I steadied myself. "Your Honor," I began, my voice thinner than I wanted but steady, "I have lived in my house for over 40 years. I pay my bills. I cook my meals. I remember my husband's laugh, my daughter's first words, and the exact day she first betrayed me. I am not incompetent. I am simply inconvenient to her plans." For a moment, silence stretched. Then the judge nodded slowly, making notes on his pad. The hearing adjourned, but no decision was made that day. Outside the courthouse, Lauren brushed past me, her perfume sharp in the air. "This isn't over," she whispered, her words slicing cleaner than any gavel. And I knew she was right. The law might be on my side, but family wars are never fought only in courtrooms. They bleed into kitchens, into phone calls, into every silence at night. Still, as I walked down the courthouse steps with Maria steady at my side, I felt something I hadn't in weeks: resolve. The battle had begun, but so had my refusal to disappear. The second hearing was worse than the first, not because the judge was harsher but because Lauren came prepared to drag my name through the mud with a precision that took my breath away. Her lawyer strode into the courtroom carrying a thick folder, the kind of folder that announces itself before it is opened. When she began laying out the evidence, I felt the world tilt. First came medical records, or what looked like them. Copies of doctors' notes I had never seen, signed with a scrawl that vaguely resembled the physician I'd visited years ago for arthritis. The notes claimed I suffered from progressive cognitive decline. I could hear the sharp intake of breath from Maria behind me. My stomach dropped. Forgery, Reynolds whispered, his jaw tight. We'll challenge it. Then came the neighbors' statements. Except they weren't from the neighbors who waved to me every morning or accepted the pies I baked on holidays. They were from newer families down the block, people who barely knew me but who now claimed I wandered outside late at night in confusion, that they'd seen my lights left on for days, that I once knocked on the wrong door looking for my husband. Lies, all of it, but written, signed, notarized. Lauren sat through it all with her face perfectly composed, as though none of this pained her. I stared at her hands folded neatly in her lap and thought of the small scar on her knuckle from when she fell off her bike at 7, how I had kissed it to make it better. Now those same hands were signing away my sanity. Reynolds rose to object, his voice sharp. Your Honor, these documents are suspect. We will prove their falsity. This is character assassination, not truth. He presented my real medical file, letters from my current doctor stating I had no signs of dementia, that my faculties were intact. He presented Maria's affidavit, detailed and precise, of the countless conversations we'd had, the errands we'd run together, the clarity she'd witnessed daily. Still, the damage had been done. I could see it in the judge's face. The seed of doubt had been planted. That was all Lauren needed. During a recess, I caught Lauren's eye across the hallway. For the first time, her mask cracked. Not with shame or hesitation, but with anger, pure, smoldering anger that I had not rolled over as easily as she'd hoped. She leaned toward me as we passed. You're embarrassing yourself, she hissed, her words slicing low. And you're making it worse for when you lose. I wanted to scream at her, to demand where my daughter had gone, the one who used to curl against me on the couch during thunderstorms. Instead, I straightened my shoulders and walked past her, each step a refusal. That night, back home, I sat by the fire with Maria. The forged records, the lies, the whispers, it all pressed down until I thought I might break. But Maria took my hand. They're desperate, she said. Desperation makes people sloppy. And sloppy people get caught. Her words planted a small, stubborn flame in me. For the first time, I wondered if Lauren's ambition might unravel itself, if greed could be its own noose. I went to bed that night still trembling, but with a new thought steadying me. If she wants war, then let her see what her mother looks like when she fights back.